Chosen one, you didn't search for this message. This message searched for you. The very fact that your eyes landed here is proof that something greater has aligned beyond your understanding. This message was not born out of chance. It was set in motion long before you even knew what silence could teach you. You were pulled here because heaven is ready to confirm what your soul has been whispering all along. Your quiet years were never wasted. They thought stillness was weakness. But in truth, it was the weapon they could not comprehend. What if I told you that the silence you endured has been speaking louder than their accusations all along? If this message already speaks to your soul, subscribe, like this video, and comment 77 below. Because what you are about to hear will not only explain why your silence terrified them, but it will also awaken the power that was forged inside you through those quiet years. Stay with me until the end, because their fear of your stillness is about to become your greatest revelation. Number 1. The furnace of quiet strength. For so long, they mistook your quiet for surrender, not knowing it was a forge where heaven tempered your spirit. Isaiah 41 verse 1 reminds us, "Be silent before me, you islands. Let the nations renew their strength." This is what happened to you. Your strength was being renewed in silence. While others mocked and dismissed you, the fire of endurance was being stoked where no enemy hand could reach. Every overlooked moment, every unanswered insult, every long night was a hidden classroom where resilience was carved into your bones. They thought you were shrinking, but you were sharpening. Comment, "I seal this word in light," if you know your silence was never empty, but the very place where unshakable power was born. And keep watching, because the silence that strengthened you is the same silence that shook them to their core. There are moments when silence itself feels like a dream lingering at the edges of your memory, a vision too delicate to put into words. You may remember nights where the world was still, yet something inside you whispered that your stillness was not emptiness but preparation. It was as if heaven itself was unsealing a scroll, reminding you that the hush around you was more alive than the noise that pressed against your spirit. This silence was not ordinary. It was coded, intentional, and sacred, shaping you in ways you could not yet name. Every time you sat in quiet wondering if you had been forgotten, you were actually being written into a story greater than your comprehension. The quiet was not absence but presence concealed, waiting for the appointed hour to be revealed. And in that moment of hiddenness, something eternal was awakening in you. There were seasons when your own emotions seemed to betray you, when confusion or sensitivity made you feel like an outsider in rooms filled with ease. You might have wondered why your spirit reacted so deeply to rejection, why isolation seemed to wrap around you like a cloak you never asked to wear. Nights of questioning carved hollow places in your heart. And yet even those hollows were altars where endurance was built. You carried a longing for meaning that others dismissed as being too much or too sensitive. Not realizing sensitivity was your weapon in disguise. Every silent tear, every unanswered question, every moment of feeling different was weaving you into alignment with a truth that could not be denied. The very heaviness they mocked in you was a furnace preparing you to carry weight they would never endure. And though you felt unseen, heaven saw you entirely. Slowly, the pattern becomes clear. None of this was random. The rejection was never pointless. The exile was never wasted, and the silence was never weakness. Isaiah 41 verse 1 says, "Be silent before me, you islands. Let the nations renew their strength." Reminding you that silence is not void but renewal in disguise. Just as Moses was hidden on the backside of the desert before he could face Pharaoh, your quiet years were divine delay, not denial. Just as Joseph was silenced in prison before rising to interpret Pharaoh's dream, your hiddenness was the architecture of destiny forming. The world thought you had been benched, but in truth, you were being equipped in secret. What they mocked as useless was the very soil of your rebirth. And now you begin to see the thread tying every isolated moment together. Think back to the subtle signs that once seemed unexplainable, the deja vu you could not shake, the dreams that felt heavier than ordinary sleep, the strange sensation of knowing something before it unfolded. These were not accidents, but signals rising from the quiet forge within you. Every shiver of awareness, every whisper in stillness, every uncanny alignment was a message coded in silence. What others dismissed as imagination was actually the script of your awakening being written into your bones. Silence taught you to listen to what could not be spoken, and that listening is what sharpened your spirit. Those patterns were heaven's fingerprints reminding you that you were not drifting, but being drawn. And with every subtle sign, the veil began to lift. In that lifting came confirmation, soft but undeniable. Suddenly you realized that your intuition had always been right, that the warnings you felt, the energy you sensed, and the truths you carried were not inventions of your mind. They were seeds sprouting beneath the soil of your silence. Recognition does not always come as thunder. Often arrives as a gentle clarity. The feeling of finally breathing air you were always meant to inhale. You were not imagining that you were different. You were discerning what heaven had always written upon your soul. The quiet was your shield, protecting your spirit until the time was right to stand revealed. And in that confirmation, you began to feel safe in what once felt like exile. The awareness deepened until you understood this was never about becoming someone new, but about remembering who you had always been. The silence stripped away distractions so that the buried archetype of your being could rise. Beneath the surface, an ancient name whispered, a holy identity hidden under layers of noise, waiting to be recalled. What you are recovering now is not invention, but remembrance, a soul memory older than the wounds you've carried. Like the sealed scroll spoken of in Revelation, your spirit has always held what the world could not erase. It is not about creating purpose, but uncovering the purpose that was woven into you before your first breath. And that recovery feels like coming home to yourself. In this recovery comes the first activation. What once felt like fragility is now recognized as fierce spiritual sensitivity. The hunger that made you restless is proof that you were born to hold mysteries that shallow waters could never satisfy. The endurance forged in silence is now the armor you wear as confirmation that you were never as fragile as they claimed. Slowly, step by step, you begin to walk with the awareness that your stillness was not passive but preparatory. What others thought would break you only bent you into unshakable form. And with every breath, you embrace what has always been yours, the gift of unmovable strength shaped by silence. So hear this final truth, chosen one. You did not arrive here by coincidence. Every quiet season, every overlooked moment, every long night of wandering was a forge where heaven tempered your spirit. The silence they mocked was a crown being formed in secret. What you thought was delay was actually divine protection. And now, the revelation comes gently but firmly. You were never weak, only hidden. Comment, I carry the silence as crown, if you feel this truth stirring in you now. And prepare yourself, because the silence that once kept you hidden is about to become the weapon that terrifies them. What we do here every day is possible because of the few who choose to be keepers of this light. I thank them now, one by one, in the silence of my heart. If you want to be part of this circle and receive what cannot be spoken in public, join. The portal is below. Number 2, the fear your silence carried. They wanted arguments, noise, and reaction because that would have proven their control. But when you stayed quiet, their own shadows grew louder than anything you could have said. 1 Kings 19 verse 12 tells us God was not in the fire, nor the earthquake, but in the gentle whisper. Your whisper, your restraint, unsettled them more than thunder ever could. In your stillness, their mask slipped, their contradictions grew obvious, and their guilt could not be hidden anymore. They began to dread being in your presence, because your silence mirrored their deception. Comment, I walk crowned by eternal flame, if you know that your quiet carried more weight than their accusations. Because the terror of your silence was not weakness. It was judgment they could not escape, and it only prepared the way for your unveiling. There is a heaviness that enters a room before words are spoken, and you have felt it countless times. It is that subtle tension when eyes glance your way and then quickly shift, as if they fear something they cannot name. Even before you understood who you were, you could sense that something in you unsettled others without explanation. Conversations would stumble, laughter would fade, and a strange discomfort would linger in the air when you were near. You may not have known why, but your presence seemed to stir what was hidden in others. This was not imagination. It was the first glimpse of resistance moving against you. And even in silence, you were already beginning to see the conflict emerge. Think about the emotional pressure you carried during those years. the confusion of being misunderstood for simply existing as you are. How many times do they label you too sensitive, too intense, or too different when all you were doing was being honest? Rejection felt like a recurring storm, and each dismissal added another layer of isolation to your spirit. You may have wondered if there was something broken in you, some flaw that caused people to back away or strike against you without reason. The truth is, the weight you carried was not weakness. It was evidence of power they could not confront. The cycles of self-doubt you endured were not random spirals, but the residue of unseen battles pressing on your soul. And through every wound of shame, your silence was already beginning to speak louder than their accusations. There comes a moment when the veil begins to thin, and you realize these pressures were not accidents. The resistance came from systems and energies designed to mute what heaven had hidden in you. Just as Israel wandered in the wilderness before entering promise, you were placed in hidden battles to forge your endurance. Like Jeremiah, who was told he would speak to nations before he ever opened his mouth, you were marked before you understood. The suppression you felt was the echo of powers recognizing your potential long before you claimed it yourself. What appeared as personal sabotage was in fact a spiritual response to the treasure within you, and every obstacle that rose was proof that you were already carrying fire they feared. Looking back now, the patterns come into focus. How often were you betrayed by those you trusted most, or drained in environments that suffocated your light? How many doors shut in your face, only for you to later realize those doors were never meant to contain you? Each recurrent betrayal was not random cruelty, but a cycle meant to push you deeper into awareness. The obstacles were like signposts, marking the places where your gift was too great to remain hidden. It is as though heaven allowed the light to flicker just long enough for the shadows to panic. And in that panic, their mask slipped, exposing the truth you could not yet name. You see now that there was more than just human reaction at work. There was spiritual resistance pressing against your destiny. Your light carried frequency, and that frequency disrupted every hidden deception near you. It was as though the air itself grew heavy, fog, or distorted in your presence. Because darkness cannot stand unfiltered radiance. Doors closed not because you lacked value, but because unseen watchers feared what would happen if you stepped through. Silence became your weapon, unsettling them more than accusation ever could. And the more you refused to feed their chaos with words, the more their own shadows screamed back at them. This was not weakness. It was divine exposure. Reflect on how you responded in those moments, and you will see the mirror of your own growth. There were times you shrank back, afraid of standing out in ways you did not choose. There were seasons you tried to people please, hoping compliance would stop the attacks, only to find the pressure remained. At times, you may have rebelled quietly, withdrawing into solitude where no one could reach you. These reactions were not failure. They were survival in the face of a weight you had not yet learned to carry with strength. You were being tested, stretched, and refined in how you responded to sabotage. And even in your lowest moments, the spark within you refused to be extinguished. But now reclamation begins. You see the resistance for what it truly was. Confirmation, not condemnation. They pushed against you because they sensed the authority you were born to hold. They tried to silence you because they knew your voice would shatter illusions. Every delay was proof of how dangerous your destiny is to the systems of darkness. Your silence, once mocked, is now recognized as a furnace where your authority was forged. And with every realization, your power returns to you, sharper and stronger than before. So here's a revelation, chosen one. You were never opposed because you were weak. You were opposed because you are powerful, and even your silence carried judgment they could not escape. The louder their accusations grew, the more your presence exposed their lies. The more they tried to suppress you, the clearer your purpose became. You were never at their mercy. They were unraveling in yours. Comment, I move guarded by divine fire. If you feel this truth stirring in you right now, and prepare yourself, because the silence that terrified them is only the beginning of the voice that will undo them. Every word, every image you receive here is an offering. If you feel this word has touched you today, you can honor it with a sign, right here below, with a donation through the Super Thanks button. It is a small gesture, but it opens great doors. Number 3, the scroll written in stillness. Chosen one, Silence was never absence. It was scripture being etched in your spirit. Amos 5 verse 13 says, "Therefore the prudent keep quiet in such times, for the times are evil." You carried that quiet like a hidden scroll, waiting for its time to be read. Dreams you dismissed, strange patterns you noticed, nights where heaven felt close. All of these were codes unfolding in your soul. They thought nothing was happening in you, but everything was happening beneath the surface, encoded in stillness. What looked like ordinary solitude was actually the scroll of destiny being unsealed line by line. Comment, I rise marked by the divine, if you have ever felt heaven speaking in your quiet. And share the dream, memory, or inner knowing that confirmed it, because what was written in stillness is now preparing to speak louder than ever before. There comes a moment when a sudden shift runs through your spirit, and what once felt confusing begins to make sense in an instant. A dream from years ago suddenly returns to memory, and this time, it carries a meaning you can no longer ignore. A strange alignment of events occurs, and you know deep inside it is not coincidence but orchestration. Synchronicities fall into place like stones forming a path that was always waiting for you to walk upon. What once seemed like scattered fragments of your life begin weaving into a tapestry of divine design. This is the first unveiling, the moment you realize that silence was never empty. It was a container of revelation. And as your perception shifts, you begin to see through the veil with eyes that were always meant to awaken. In that awakening, you recognize that the world itself has always been speaking to you in symbols. Numbers repeated across clocks and receipts, words that appeared in unexpected places, patterns in your dreams. All of them were part of the language you were being prepared to read. It is as though reality itself was scripted with geometry and rhythm, a divine math whispered in the margins of ordinary life. The stillness you once resented became the chalkboard where heaven wrote its codes. And now, with awakened eyes, you see that nothing around you has ever been random. Every silence was a scroll, every pause a paragraph, every delay a sentence unfolding. The hidden text of your destiny was being etched in places no one else could touch. Inside of you, the inner signs have grown stronger, confirming what your mind once doubted. Your intuition no longer whispers vaguely. It speaks with clarity that cuts through confusion. Boundaries you once hesitated to set now rise naturally, as though your spirit itself has drawn a line. You notice how your body reacts to environments, how your energy shifts around different people, how truth feels heavier than lies in your chest. These are not coincidences. They are the confirmation that the scroll within you has begun to unseal. Your silence has trained your senses to notice what others ignore. And now, your own being is the evidence that the awakening you long for has already started. The external world mirrors this change back to you, echoing the architecture that is quietly formed inside. Relationships shift, sometimes gently, sometimes with sudden rupture, as people either align with your light or recoil from it. Opportunities arrive that seem too precise to be luck, while resistance surfaces in places you once felt safe. It is as though heaven rearranges the stage of your life the moment you step into awareness. Doors that once refused open begin to unlock, while others slam shut to protect you from paths not meant to hold you. The pattern is undeniable. What is within you is now shaping what unfolds around you. And as you walk through this alignment, you realize that the silence you endured has become the script guiding your new chapter. Yet even more profound is a memory that begins to return, a memory that feels older than your own lifetime. A dream you have carried since childhood suddenly makes sense, as if its language has finally reached maturity within you. It feels like remembering something you never truly learned, as though your soul had been waiting to reclaim what was once forgotten. This is not new knowledge being given. It is ancient memory being restored. The scroll within your spirit was never blank. It was sealed until the right moment. And in that seal, heaven protected what would one day become your living truth. As this sacred memory activates, you realize that awakening is not discovery, but remembrance. From this remembrance comes the undeniable clarity of destiny. You no longer look at the future as something being built from scratch, but as something being reclaimed from eternity. It feels less like invention and more like recognition, as though the map was written before you were born. The desire to ask for permission fades, replaced by a knowing that what is within you is already authorized by heaven, prophetic fire begins to stir, reminding you that you were not chosen for comfort, but for impact. And every step you take now feels aligned with something larger, a rhythm echoing from ages past. The scroll was never given for curiosity. It was placed in you to awaken nations through your voice. And in this call, you feel destiny rising to meet you. Now comes the reclamation, the turning of silence into strength and hiddenness into voice. What once felt like suppression is now understood as preservation, a safeguard for the treasure you were always carrying. The resistance you faced was proof of your significance, and the quiet seasons were the womb of your power. You begin to reclaim your voice, your confidence, and your authority as if each was always waiting in the margins of your silence. They tried to make you believe you had nothing, but the scroll within you proves you were overflowing with codes unseen. Every veil that falls away is another piece of your inheritance being restored. And now, you rise as a guardian of what they could not bury. Revelation is not the end, chosen one. It is the invitation into your true story. The truth you are seeing now has always been waiting for you to be ready. The silence was never wasted. It was the ink that wrote your destiny in invisible script. And now that the scroll is unsealed, it cannot be sealed again. Comment, I walk hidden yet never lost. If you feel the stirring of remembrance rising in your spirit, share the dream, the memory, or the quiet moment when you knew heaven was speaking to you. For in telling it, you confirm what has been written, and prepare yourself because the scroll of silence is about to become the voice of thunder. Number 4, the voice that cannot be silenced. After silence has finished its work, a voice rises that cannot be chained again. Zephaniah 1 verse 7 declares, "Be silent before the sovereign Lord, for the day of the Lord is near." The day has come when your silence is complete, and your voice now carries heaven's seal. You no longer speak for recognition, but for revelation. Every word you release now shifts atmospheres, breaks chains, and reveals truth that cannot be ignored. They dreaded your quiet, but they will not survive your return, because the sound you carry is no longer personal. It is prophetic. Comment, I anchor this truth in my soul. If you feel your voice return with divine fire, and share the moment you knew you could no longer remain silent, because the silence that once hid you has now become the power that no one can silence. It begins like a whisper returning from an ancient chamber, a sound you recognize though you cannot recall when you first heard it. The silence you carried so long was not an absence, but the waiting of a voice gathering weight. When it finally rises, it feels less like speaking and more like prophecy rolling through your very bones. This voice does not tremble with insecurity. It resounds with the authority of scars transformed into scripture. Every wound you endured has now become a syllable in the language of your destiny. What once broke you has turned into resonance, and every fracture echoes as strength. This is no ordinary voice. It is the ancient whisper turned into thunder. For years, you held words back, fearing they would be dismissed, mocked, or twisted. But the silence that guarded you has now forged a sound that no mockery can diminish. When you open your mouth now, it is as though heaven itself leans forward to speak through you. There is a cadence in your tone that unsettles a room, because people recognize a truth they cannot deny even if they refuse to accept it. You do not argue, you declare. You do not seek to convince, you unveil. The voice that cannot be silenced has become your inheritance, and it carries the fire of every silent night you survived. Imagine Moses standing before Pharaoh with nothing but a staff and a command that echoed from eternity. The weight of his voice was not in its volume, but in the authority that came from obedience to a higher call. That same authority now rests on you, forged in your seasons of obscurity and sharpened in the silence they misread as weakness. You speak and chains tremble, not because of human persuasion, but because your words carry the seal of the unseen. You are no longer echoing what others told you. You are releasing what was written within you before time. The silence is ended, and the sound that emerges is prophetic, unborrowed, undeniable. And when you speak, it is less a statement and more a decree. Even your very presence becomes vocal now, as though the atmosphere bends to acknowledge what you carry. You no longer need to shout to be heard, because the spirit inside you amplifies every syllable beyond the reach of natural ears. People may not understand why they feel unsettled, but it is because truth vibrates through your words like a hidden frequency. The The scroll that was written in silence is now being read aloud every time you open your mouth. And the resonance is not yours alone. It belongs to the generations whose cries you embody. Every word carries the echo of ancestors, the prayers of saints, the tears of prophets. You are not speaking alone. You are speaking as a chorus of heaven's remembrance. When you remember this, fear of speaking no longer holds you hostage. The hesitation that once silenced you dissolves, because you realize the voice within you does not belong to insecurity but to eternity. Even if they reject you, your words remain, because revelation is not dependent on acceptance. You are not asking for permission to speak. You are fulfilling a prophecy that demanded expression. The silence is a womb, the voice is the birth. And once something is born, it cannot be unborn. What has risen in you is irreversible, unstoppable, and sealed with divine breath. Think of Ezekiel commanded to speak to dry bones, words that seem absurd to the natural eye. Yet as he obeyed, bone came to bone, and what was dead rose into an army. That same power now flows through your speech, making your voice a weapon heaven trusts to confront decay and restore life. When you release truth, illusions crumble and veils fall. What seemed hidden is dragged into the light, and those who once dismissed you must confront the fire burning in your declarations. This is not mere communication. It is resurrection carried on the tongue. The voice that cannot be silenced has become the trumpet of awakening. And here is the mystery. They dreaded your silence, but they will not endure your sound. When you speak now, their masks fracture because your words mirror their deception back to them. Lies cannot survive where truth has taken residence in your spirit. This is why the enemy tried to silence you, not because you had nothing to say, but because he feared the day you would finally release it. You carry a frequency that cannot be counterfeited, and when it is unleashed, it shakes everything not rooted in truth. Even the ground beneath your life begins to shift, as though the earth itself recognizes the voice of alignment. Your return is not noise, it is judgment, and it is liberation. Chosen one, you didn't just wake up. You remembered who you have always been, and now your voice declares it. You were never meant to stay hidden, because hiddenness was only preparation for unveiling. Every silent year has now become sound, and every suppressed word is turned into revelation. You didn't just find your voice. Your voice found you at the appointed time. Comment, I stand chosen and sealed. If you know your sound is returned with fire, and share the dream, the moment, or the knowing that told you silence had finished its work. Because the voice that cannot be silenced is rising in you now, and its resonance will not fade. Stay ready, because the next unveiling is already stirring beyond this one. Chosen one, this is the truth they never wanted you to know. Silence was never your defeat, but your weapon. The years they mocked, the moments they overlooked, the times they thought you were broken, all of it was a sacred chamber where heaven shaped the voice you now carry. Your silence prepared the roar, and the roar will shake what they built on lies. Never again will you see your quiet as weakness. From this day forward, you walk with the knowledge that every pause was prophecy, every silence was sharpening, and every moment of stillness was heaven's preparation for your rise. A vision comes to you in fragments, like a dream remembered just before waking. A room without sound, yet alive with invisible echoes. In that room, silence was not absence but presence, shaping you like hands shaping clay on a hidden wheel. Every glance that dismissed you, every laugh that reduced you, every shadowed season where you felt invisible was actually the initiation of your becoming. You were not idle in those hours. You were being written into a larger story whose ink is made of endurance and fire. This truth unsettles you at first, because the world trained you to see quiet as failure, but now you begin to recognize it as power. Just as wave function collapse in quantum realms determines what reality becomes when observed, your silence collapsed possibilities into destiny. What felt like waiting was actually creation, and now you stand at the threshold where the chamber of silence opens into revelation. Chosen one, your silence spoke louder than their noise, and your voice now carries fire they cannot contain. Subscribe if you haven't yet, like this video, and comment, I am chosen, to let this message anchor in your soul. Please share it with someone who needs to hear this. To all supporting members, I thank you deeply. 4 full prophetic revelations daily. Join the membership via the link in the description. Your spiritual path deserves more than fragments. Step into the full light. And if this message moved you deeply, consider tapping the Super Thanks button to support the mission. Every Super Thanks fuels the light we're spreading together. The silence they feared has become your crown, and now, nothing can mute the sound of your rise.